Welcome to Comic Wars. Tonight, we're discussing a matchup that, well, we should have been doing last week, but due to some unforeseen events, I wasn't able to get to that. But we're doing it right now tonight, so. We're actually going to be discussing a matchup that I really only discovered happened already. Sort of. One that is still very interesting. And you guys will see that when we start going over feats, especially. It gets really, really interesting real quick. And I do hope all of you are still interested after seeing the thumbnail, after seeing the title and all this, because I've already had people tell me, well, this is the dumbest fight ever. This is so dumb. It's so dumb. It's going to be just evenly matched, or you're going to see just complete and utter onslaught from one side. Don't be so sure. This is actually a very interesting match. Like I said, you guys will see this in the feats. I don't want to spoil anything quite yet. And I'm going to go and break down, as we always do, live. I don't know who wins this match. I do have my sneaking suspicion, but we're going to start breaking it down, what all this stuff means, discussing it, yada, yada, yada. But this match is actually between two Onryo. Now, for those that are not familiar with an Onryo, that's basically a vengeful spirit that can actually hurt others. Think similar to a poltergeist, except they can actually straight up just murder people just because. This comes from Japanese lore. Both these characters actually are rooted in the Japanese film industry, and the Japanese horror film industry to be specific. And I'm talking about Samara Morgan, who's actually based on the movie Ringu's version of Sadako. I don't remember what her last name is, but that's who Samara Morgan is based on, except Samara Morgan's also an 11-year-old girl who's, well, that's when she died, at 11 years old. And Kayako Saeki, which is based on the Japanese horror film Ju-on, but we're going to be using both American iterations. So we have The Ring versus The Grudge. Who's going to win this one? This is going to be a very interesting one, I promise you. So, but remember that the victor of each match is announced at the end, during the outcome, which is actually directly at the end of the show, right before the preview. So, without further ado, let's get into the overview. As usual, if we had a guest tonight, this is where we do the guest intros, their guesses, a little bit about the guests themselves, things like that. No guests tonight, so we're going to skip right into the background details. This is where we go over little details that, more often than not, especially in this season, have actually played somewhat of key factors. This is going to be where we go over their age, their area of operation, their occupation, height, weight, things like this, little personality details. You'll notice this is going to be pretty much similar right across the board, so I'm just going to get a little heads up here. Background details, not going to matter too much here, okay? Pretty much next to nothing. You'll see what I'm talking about when we go over feats. Background's not going to matter at all, really. All right, and after that, then we get into the feats. This is where we go over things like their strength, durability, speed and agility, martial prowess, ingenuity, powers, and gadgets. In some cases, you could even argue weapons separately. For instance, we've had to kind of with in the Michael versus Jason match. You guys will remember that one correctly. They use weapons. There's no gadgets, things like this. I mean, technically speaking. One of the Jasons technically had gadgets. After that, then we're going to get into the data analysis. This is where we actually get into all the details. What do all these points matter? So, for instance, on a strength feat, somebody, like for instance Jason, hitting somebody hard enough to be able to go and just make their head fly right off their body. How much strength does that take? So what is the PSI that's needed to be able to do that? Somebody withstands being hit by, we'll say, a nuclear bomb, or getting hit by a car, things like this. I know they're two different polar opposite basically, but we need to go and measure that force. How much damage can they take? And then we're going to look at, well, what kind of damage they receive. And we're going to kind of just analyze that as well. Speed and agility, things like that. And then after data analysis, this is where we would go over the character pros and cons. More or less, kind of seeing how they match up against each other, because there's going to be some comparisons that go on here. If there's similarities, we're going to go and compare those right away, what the different levels are, okay? And then after that, we get into the guest analysis. This also includes you guys in the chat. You guys are welcome to go and just shout out throughout this entire show who you guys think is going to win and why. But this is where we can actually connect and actually have a straight up discussion. So feel free. I totally encourage everybody to chime in. You guys think this is the dumbest fight ever. Hey, that's okay. Let's talk about it. You guys think this is the greatest fight ever. Hey, all right, let's talk about it. I'm just curious about what some of these things mean. Let's break it down, including the science, numbers, all this. Let's break it all down. So if you guys have questions, this is also a great time to ask. After that, then we get into the outcome. This is where we start analyzing who wins. More often than not, this season especially, we couldn't just go and say, okay, well, based on this, just no matter what, this character's going to win. We have quite a few matchups where we actually have to analyze scenarios. This is where we're going to get into that. What kind of scenarios are going to give an edge? Which ones are going to give a disadvantage to either party? But we are essentially, just for clarity's sake, the best way to describe this is imagine infinite flat plain. No hills, it's just flat. There's nothing around for infinite. Okay, so that's essentially the terrain we look at. And it's just, there's no advantage. It's not like grass or dirt or anything. It's just, think kind of like a hard light, if you will. That's how I would describe it. That's what we're basically looking at. Just something that doesn't give an advantage to anybody. Just that's what we're looking at. And then, of course, after that, we get into the preview. So let's get into our first competitor tonight. Samara Morgan. She was technically created by Koji Suzuki. That was the writer of of Ringu. But for the American iteration, we have Samara Morgan versus Sadako. This is completely different. Sadako is like in her 40s. Samara is 11 at the time of her death. She is 4 foot 4 inches tall. We don't even know how tall or how much she weighs. Getting the height, this is just kind of a rough estimate. And this is going to be on both characters here because they technically can manipulate their height, their weight, whatever they want. They can, you're talking spirits here. So do they technically have a weight? No, but can they have a weight? Yes. You'll also see that these characters also, for the most part, they don't have a specific area of operation. Specifically Samara, she really doesn't. I'll explain here in a second, but she's basically everywhere. As for her personality, well, she's vengeful. That's all she feels. There's times where you can question throughout the Ring series if she felt other things. But she's an Onryo. Let's just put it bluntly that way. You see that throughout the entire series. She's just vengeful. And she's murderous. Very, very murderous. But a little tidbit about her. Well, Samara is actually the American version of the Japanese Onryo, Sadako. As for her feats, well, strength, well, we don't see her complete any physical feats, durability feats at all, really. She doesn't really lay her hands on people. That's the one thing we do know. It is described in the movie and throughout the series that she's a telepath, but she's also telekinetic. And her powers just kept growing and growing and growing. This is the best way to describe it. Think if Professor X was murdered, okay, or Jean Grey. Do they technically die? Well, the way the X-Men are described, especially powerful telepaths and telekinetic, well, especially the telepaths, but the telekinetics, you more often than not, you see a telepath, they've got telekinesis. So therefore, as long as they're a telepath, they're able to essentially astral project away on a whim. they can literally escape their body, and they live on in a way. But this also leads to the power of, do they have the power to possess? Because at this point, it's their spirit, it's their mind, it's their like mental projection that lives on. So there's limitations at times, and in some characters there's not. With the case of Samara, her spirit lives on, but she's incorporeal. Okay, we'll break that down in a bit, but she does have a physical body too. But we never really see her take any damage. So, as for speed and agility, well, she's capable of teleportation, so technically speaking, it's pretty much instantaneous. However, when she does happen to physically move at somebody, so when she turns the TV on, does her thing, and she starts climbing out of the TV, what happens? Well, she always slowly staggers at her opponents. You see her at times where she'll stagger a little bit faster, but more often than not, she just staggers pretty slow. As for combat capabilities, there's no known combat training at all. As for her ingenuity, well, this is where we get into basically the details of the curse for these characters. She relies on her curse to pass on to her opponents via videotapes. And this is where we're going to get into a scenario where we can't just use the flat plane. Okay, that's why I brought that up early. So you guys see, she has restrictions. This is kind of like when we look at the Freddy versus Pinhead matchup. Similar. They're not going to be able to just go, oh, flat plane, done. These characters wouldn't be able to fight unless certain conditions are met. I'll get into that in a second, because we got to go and get into Kayako before we can do that. So what kind of powers does she come with? Invisibility, illusion creation, telekinesis, telepathy, paralysis inducement. Anytime she's coming at somebody, she can literally induce paralysis. They can't move, they're stuck. And in some cases, their breathing even slows or stops. We get to see this throughout the series. You can also see this, I believe it's through Ringu. You can also see this as well. Death manipulation. This is kind of a weird one because she can essentially make you kind of die however she wants. It's weird. It's not so easily explained. I know that if you were to go over verses, you go over any kind of fandom or anything, if you start breaking the data down, this is where it gets kind of funny, but this is kind of the terminology that a lot of these things like to use, is death manipulation. Essentially, she's like, okay, this is the scenario you're in, this is where you're at, all right, I'm going to go and do you in this way, to the point where she can just heart attack you to death. She could twist you up. She often disfigures her opponents. So, usually it's the really gnarly, like, opened up jaws, essentially. The jaws are like way open. And it's a really, really gnarly sight to see. In fact, I hope none of you guys look it up. It's a little disturbing. But she's also got the capability to possess as well. We got to see this when she possessed a little boy. You could go and argue that this is what happened when she got the animals to attack the protagonist and her son. She's also able to use dream manipulation. Now, we got to see that she did this to the little boy, forcing him to have nightmares. Teleportation, as we've already discussed. Clairvoyance. Now, this is an interesting one. She can literally see the future. If you see the future, can you always change it? It depends on the lore you look at. They got into it a little bit in the movie. They didn't really touch on it. So for this, we're going to go and set some boundaries here. She sees the future. Can she change it? Yes. I think that's a fair assessment. Does that necessarily mean this character can win? You can look at every situation. Look at how many situations at Endgame. How many situations did in Avengers Endgame was there a chance? And it was just a chance for the Avengers to beat Thanos. They had won, according to Avengers Endgame. This is based on what Doctor Strange said when he looked at thousands or millions of different possibilities. Excuse me. So is it possible to change? Yes. However, if somebody who's seen the future aims to change it, that changes the future. Therefore, clairvoyance, does this necessarily mean you're going to avoid every possibility of loss? No. That's the key to this. Somebody that sees the future, as long as they do everything according to how it's supposed to go, but know what they're going to do in advance. They do it everything to a T. And then at that last moment, right before they're about to lose or whatever, or be defeated, they're able to adjust the outcome. So they're like, okay, well, this is what I did and this is why I lost. They can adjust. Never a guaranteed victory, because sometimes their opponent is just so much better than them. You know, like for instance, they're in a position of power where they, like for instance, if Anakin didn't jump against Obi-Wan when he had the high ground, instead just used like the Force to go and rip the ground open and, you know, just bring him down. Could he have done that instead? Yes, he could have. It could have adjusted things, but would Obi-Wan have been able to counter that? Yeah, he had the high ground. He was going to be able to adjust pretty much almost anything that Anakin was going to throw at him at this point. So he was just like, all right, well, what do you got? You got nothing. Anakin would have been forced to basically just keep going down the lava and then hop up at a later point, or get or find some other method of being able to get up to Obi-Wan. So it's that type of thing where you can look at every scenario, might not necessarily work. So is clairvoyance like overpowered? No. After that, then we have technology manipulation. This is essentially she can turn things on and off from a distance. She can go through one piece of technology and manipulate others. I mean, there's all sorts of things she can do with this, but primary usage of this is her turning televisions on to force their opponents to see that, oh, here she comes through the television. She's also got incorporeality, which is what we discussed earlier. Essentially, she doesn't die. If you were to go and kill this incorporeal form, does she lose? No. There's ways around it, because we know that she has a physical body. But this is also where we get into she's essentially, she uses an avatar. If you're to damage the physical body, could she be defeated? Technically speaking, this is where you have to get into lore. Spirits, more often than not, are incorporeal, which means that's not their actual form. That's something like they're just summoned. It's an avatar. Now, this is where you have to look into lore of things when it comes to forms like this. If you look at things like supernatural, you can beat a ghost, but how do you defeat a ghost? To truly defeat it, you either help it pass on, okay, or you salt and burn the body, the remains. That defeats it. Copper, you can swing through it. So there's different methods. There's also exorcisms, which is usually for demons. You can use holy water in some cases, especially with an evil spirit. Curses would be defined as an evil spirit or cursed beings, so therefore holy water technically could affect it most likely. We don't have a whole lot into the lore of it on how these curses work. As much as the movies give us, they don't give us things like that. So it leaves this big, wide open area of speculation. It sucks, but that being said, destroying her body would destroy her. However, she's a cursed spirit. So we have to think, if you remove the curse, could that also work? Then you have to figure out what the curse is, right? Okay, so there's that too. Could you manipulate a curse? Sure. Could that defeat her? Possibly. Removal should be able to do it. But manipulating the curse as well, you could force its hand into basically causing a defeat. You could have it, I mean, technically speaking, I mean, there's all sorts of different things you can do with a curse. So now she can only inhabit her body, for instance. If you were to manipulate that, that could be something. On top of that, she's been known to heal others. She healed her father's blindness only to kill him right after. Nice girl, but then again, her father wasn't exactly a nice guy either, so. But what about her opponent? Who's she going against, right? What do we know about her? Kayako Saeki, created by Takashi Shimizu. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. 30 years old at time of death. Now, this is in the Grudge lore, all right? She is approximately 5 foot 5 inches tall. This is what we know based on what the actress's height is. Other than that, I couldn't find a whole lot. You can start measuring around, but it does end up about that. So, and it just depends on the angles too. Sometimes she looks a little taller, sometimes a little shorter. So we're just going to use the actress's height. So she's a total of 13 inches taller. So she's quite a bit bigger and a bit older. Angry spirits have been dead for years. So when it comes down to it, who's going to have the experience here? Well, they just do the same thing day in, day out, day in, day out. So there's not going to be a whole lot of experience there that's going to really matter. Her occupation, just like Samara, is that she's an Onryo. Her area of operation. Now, this is where things get interesting. She can go anywhere. She's capable of teleporting and all this. However, her curse is on her home. And anybody that walks in, it becomes a target. So her area of operation, really the only area she can actually stay at initially, is going to be the Saeki household. Once again, personality, vengeful, angry. Anybody that watches their child being murdered as they're trying to breathe through a broken X/windpipe, that would make you pretty angry. But Kayako was obsessed with American professor Peter Kirk. Now, this is actually what caused this entire issue here, because her husband was incredibly jealous of that. Understandably so. She's obsessed over another man, and this guy is, she wants to be with this guy. And she kind of got creepy and just had nail, pieces of his nails and things like that. She got real creepy. So he basically just said no, or her husband said no, no more of this, and he just went ballistic and killed her, killed their son, and then killed himself. There's a lot of reasons as to why the house became cursed, but this goes back to Japanese lore, vengeful women, things like this. It's all sorts of things that get into it, but what does she come with here, right? Well, her strength, well, now we know a few things about her. She has terrifying superhuman strength. She's capable of breaking human bones with ease, just like twigs. Keep in mind, to break the human femur, it's 1700 psi. May not seem like a lot, but if you think about it, that's just to break it. That's not breaking it with ease. She breaks it with ease, like a twig. She also flings a kid around like a rag doll while invisible. No problem. As for her durability, well, it's assumed basically average adult human female, but we don't really know because we never see really take any damage. Speed and agility, she's capable of teleporting. However, she always crawls on her hands and feet at her opponents with different speeds. Oh my goodness, I spelled it wrong. As for combat capabilities, we don't know if she actually has any combat training at all. It's to be assumed she doesn't. So her ingenuity, once again, this is where her curse kind of breaks down here. Relies on her opponents to enter her former place of residence, currently where she is at the Saeki residence. So her powers, now she's got a little more versatility here. Invisibility. I forgot to include intangibility. I think that was her who's got it. One of them has it. I'm pretty sure it's her. Yeah, it's her. She has intangibility. I don't know why I didn't put that down. Necromancy, so those that she kills can become part of the curse. It's not really shown how that's decided. It's just some of her victims do become part of the curse. It's interesting. But now this is where I brought these things up for a reason. She has the ability to remove curses and to also manipulate them. This can play a key factor here. I just want to make that very, very clear. As on top of that, she can also create illusions. She's telekinetic, telepathic. She manipulates her hair in a way like literally it'll grow and grow and grow and grow, and she can hang people with it. She can just do whatever she wants. She can just murder with her hair. Sounds like an Inuyasha villain. In fact, it was like the very first villain in Inuyasha, if I'm not mistaken. That would be another good character to go and analyze. On top of that, darkness manipulation, which goes into her shadow wraith form. She literally turns into a shadow. And she can just go and interact with somebody right in front of them as a shadow and do stuff. Like straight kill people and all this. I mean, it's pretty nasty, but she typically uses this to induce more and more fear. A lot of these spirits, you break it down, what do they rely on a lot of the time? They like to go and play with their victims, essentially, their opponents, before they actually strike them down. More often than not. Sometimes they're just like, this is just, I don't feel like really messing around today. We're going to take care of this person right away. And other ones like, ooh, this looks interesting. Let's go and toy with them repeatedly over the course of years. Let's do it. And this is the case. You see this throughout the movie. This elderly lady moves into the Saeki household, and she essentially just keeps making things worse and worse and worse for her, and then she kills her. So, on top of that, she's got paralysis inducement. So just like Samara, she can also induce paralysis. Shape-shifting, death manipulation, same kind of thing. She can just stare at you and kill you. I mean, that's essentially what she can do. It's funny, but it's like, come on, this is kind of cheesy. She can also possess as well. She also is capable of dream manipulation. We've seen that she's been able to do that to a few of her victims as well. And she is capable of teleporting, as we've discussed. And she is the one with intangibility as well. So, I've already gone over some of the data we really need to break down. Can we measure telekinesis? You can measure about how much it takes, how much PSI it takes to move, because there is energy involved with telekinesis. It's still kinetic energy, but it's moving it with your mind, so it's using there's all sorts of different things that come into it, but it's like electrical waves, radio waves, things like that. That's you'd have to read more on it, so I would suggest if you're going to go and start reading into telekinesis, telepathy, please hop on the CIA.gov, go into their reading library. They have all sorts of documents on Project MK Ultra, and on the telekinesis, telepathy, astral projections, all this. A great source. They've actually done several studies on this, so check it there. You'll see what I'm talking about. Not to mention there's actual studies that other professors and doctors have actually done on this type of phenomenon as well, that you can find papers on. So we know it's a thing. As for how to break it down, that's just basically, I'm just breaking it down in a very, very crude manner. It's electrical waves electrical energy and radio waves. Essentially, how that breaks down how telekinesis and telepathy work. So, that being said, I mean, that's a form of energy, and we don't have any energy manipulators here, really, technically, unless you consider telekinesis, telepathy, and energy manipulation. They're not going to be able to manipulate each other's a whole lot. Like, they can, but not to the extent you think. It would be just like a struggle of whose mental muscle is stronger, essentially, in a way. But that's basically what we got for this. We're only going to be really comparing a few things on striking, throwing, and all this. There's not a whole lot to go on. That's what they can do, because are they going to be able to manipulate each other's deaths? No. Shape-shifting, could that play a factor? Possibly. Paralysis inducement, my goodness, I can't speak. That's not going to play anything because it doesn't affect each other, because they're spirits. You cannot paralyze a spirit. Shadow wraith form, is that going to really do much? Not really. It'd be one of those things, kind of like shape-shifting. Could it affect the outcome? Possibly, but maybe. Hair manipulation, that's going to be like, that could play a factor potentially. Telepathy, telekinesis could. Well, telekinesis, telepathy, not so much. Illusion creation, no. Curse manipulation, curse removal could. Necromancy, no. Visibility could potentially, kind of like who's getting the jump on who. Dream manipulation, no. Possession, no. And then teleportation, could that affect some things? Yes. So What do you guys think? Who do you think takes this? I'm gonna give you guys about a minute, starting now. Who do you guys think wins? No, let's talk about this. Who wins this? Who do you think takes the cake on this? Well, like I said, we're not going to even worry about background because it's not going to matter. So, first and foremost, is height going to matter? No. Weight won't matter either. Okay, the personalities won't matter. So we don't have to worry about that. So what about strengths? Are they going to matter? They're spirits. One's incorporeal, another one can go intangible, and they've both got the resurrection kind of ability. They just come back. So, can't really go on strength, even though she's got, you got Sayako, or not Sayako, but Kayako Saeki. She's got superhuman strength, a ridiculous amount. Is that going to play a factor here? It won't. So we can't even use that. Durability, can't use that, and even then, they're even. Speed and agility. This is where things are going to kind of be a little interesting here. So when it comes down to speed and agility, technically speaking, who wins this? They're both capable of teleporting, but then it comes down to how they travel outside of that. Now this will play a slight factor. I'm going to go and make this very clear here. Okay, this will, and that's because you've got other different kinds of things that come into it. Okay, so when it comes down to it, this is going to be Kayako, and not by much. It's not a huge lead. Martial prowess won't matter. Ingenuity doesn't matter. No. Really, what it's going to come down to is speed and agility, and then powers. I'll break this down. Why? They go hand to hand. Then you've got reach. Can they hurt each other physically? No. Can they clash? Yeah. But is it going to really do anything? No. One goes intangible, one's incorporeal, one's essentially energy, while the other one is able to just make it so you can't hurt me. Haha, kind of thing. So that doesn't really matter. This is going to strictly come down to their powers. Is their telekinesis going to do anything to them? It could, a little bit, but it's not going to be a whole lot. When we're looking at their powers, this is how this is always going to go and break down. This, no matter what, will have to be in the Saeki household. And on top of that, you have to have at least one person there that had to have watched the tape in the household. Or waited until they were on their 7th day and then went into the Saeki household. Either way, it starts off in the Saeki household, no matter what. So, that person, no matter what, they're done. The victim is just done for. Doesn't matter. However, that being said, can that person be, possessed? Absolutely. Is that going to play a factor? No. So, is any of this going to really matter here? No. Incorporeality, could it matter? Yes, it could, but here's the thing. Now, get this. This is another cursed being that enters the Saeki household. So technically speaking, whoever enters the home can also be affected. Okay? Doesn't make a difference. Samara enters the home of Kayako. Now they're locked. They have infinite stamina. They are just going to be going at it until one of them loses. Now, there's a reason I bring this up. Well, if this would load. There we go. I bring this up for this one reason. Kayako can literally manipulate and remove curses. Now, this is why I say that speed and agility could matter to a small degree. They're going to be locked. Are they just going to... There's going to be two options here. This is either going to result in a draw, because they can't beat each other. But end of the day, she's a curse. Okay? So no matter what, Kayako is going to be able to manipulate to a certain extent. She can manipulate Samara. So if she's able to manipulate Samara to some degree and her curse, she's now going to be able to get it so that way she can go and get her within winning position. Does that mean she's going to claim victory? No, it can still be the stalemate. But when it comes to powers, really, who's got the edge here? It's Kayako. And it's a pretty big edge, but it's not big enough that I would say, oh, 2 pluses are going to definitely be in order. And the reason I say this is because she's only got really one power that's going to really be able to end this fight. And that itself is going to be the curse removal. Okay? Is Kayako going to be able to remove the curse? And if she removes the curse, doesn't that mean she can just go and defeat her once and for all? Or that itself could just defeat her? But either way, this comes down to it would either be locked as a draw or Kayako wins. There is no way around this. None. Curse removal. Instantly, she wins. Or it's a draw. Does not make a difference. It's the end of the day. But for the sake of this, I mean, because Kayako can claim a win, while Samara cannot, she wins. Samara just outright loses. And that's only because that curse removal and curse manipulation. You throw these two characters against different characters, now this is where things can get a little interesting. Is Samara able to, or is Kayako able to be defeated? Yes. Time and time again, she has been. She's been outsmarted, and she's been defeated. There's ways around it. She's a curse, therefore, you got a character that's unaffected by it or is immortal. She can't kill him. She can continually be thwarted. Yeah, she's got superhuman strength and all this. Can she totally beat up guys like Jason? She can hurt him, but does that mean she's gonna win? No. But does this mean she's gonna be the grand champion of this season, though? I don't know. We'll have to find out. But that leads us right into our next matchup on Friday. It's between one of my characters, Clownface, from the very first arc in Crow, issues